What we're going to do for class today is use an if-then-else statement with a function. Well, we're going to do that for homework like we did in class the other day. If you want to use your modified flight simulator from last semester, you can do that, or you can just get a new copy of Flight Simulator. And to do that, you would go to Examples, double-click on Flight Simulator. Now, whenever you start changing existing code, you should always make a copy. That way, when you decide that you don't like the changes you've made, you can go back and get the original. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save world as, and I'm going to call this flight sim function. And from now on, any work that I do this will be saved in flight sim function and not in the original flight simulator program that came when I downloaded Alice. Now, the first thing that popped up here when I opened this was the function, or I'm sorry, the method test for crash. Now, realize in some software, in some programming, what we call methods here in Alice were called functions, and so I will sometimes slip up and call that a function. But in Alice, it is called a method, and in most object-oriented systems, of which this is one, they are called methods. In test for crash, what the software does is it looks to see if the propeller is below the ground, based on this if statement here. That's fine for if the crash is below the ground, but what if I run into the windmill? We're going to add a feature that allows it to test for that. And so if it is not below the ground, if the propeller isn't below the ground, there's an else statement here that currently says do nothing, and we're going to change that. And we're going to say if you run into the windmill. So if true, and now we have an if statement that at this point does nothing, it's just a placeholder, within the else. So it is a nested if, and it says if true, then do nothing, else do nothing. And so what we want to do is try and determine if the biplane, if the wings of the biplane are touching the fins or the, I don't know what these things are called, the fan-shaped thing, the propeller on the windmill. So we'll go to biplane here, expand biplane, click wings, and if I want to know if the wings are touching, remembering that everything in Alice's location is determined based on the center of that thing, I need to take half the length of the wings because I don't want the whole length but half the length. So I'm going to go over here to function, and oh, wait a minute, before I do that, I have got to say if biplane is within threshold, and I will get to my distances a little bit later. If biplane is within, and I can't get the exact thing that I want, so I'm just going to say 1 meter as a placeholder. If biplane is within 1 meter of windmill blades, that'll get me started. But instead of this 1 meter, what I want is half the width of the wings, and I also want half the width of the windmill blades. So I'm going to go over here to biplane wings and say wings width. Notice as soon as I start to drag it, that 1 meter gets a yellow rectangle around it, showing I can drop it on there. And as soon as I start to drop it on there, it turns green. So now it says if biplane is within subject equal biplane wings width, and then there's a little down arrow after width. I want to make that width divided by 2. So I'll go down to, I click on the arrow, go down to math, and then say wings width divided by 2. Okay, so that gives me the length of 1 wing away from the center. But now I also have to consider the length of the windmill blades. So I'm going to add on to that by clicking on this arrow here and pick math, plus, and I don't have a way to put blades in there just yet, so I'm going to put a placeholder in there of 1. And then go over here to windmill and blades. And then say blades width. We'll do the same thing we did with the biplane wing here. Now notice all the things that turn yellow. Not only in this line of code, but also up in here. There's all kinds of places I could drop this if I wanted to. And when it's aimed at the right spot, that rectangle turns green. So drop it there. Windmill blades width, and now I want to divide that by 2. Wait a minute. I want this one here, not that one. Math blades width divided by 2. Okay, now, this if statement should now test the condition for whether or not there is a collision between the airplane and the windmill. If biplane is within this distance here of the windmill blades, and this distance here is equal to the biplane wings divided by 2 plus the windmill blades divided by 2. So if that happens, I need to do something to simulate a crash. So what I'm going to do in order to simulate the crash is I'm going to have the plane spin as if the edge of the wing caught the propeller, or caught the windmill blade. So we'll go to biplane and methods, and I'm going to have the biplane turn left, and because I want it to look like it crashed, I'm going to make it spin around twice. Biplane turn 2 revolutions, and I want it to happen fairly quickly. So instead of the default, Alice always does each action in 1 second by default, I'm going to make it do it in half a second. And it's not enough for it to just spin around. I also want it to fall. So I'm going to say biplane move down. And I want it to move down far enough so the propeller is below the ground, because once the propeller is below the ground, the crash routine will kick in. So I'm going to move it down 10 meters. Probably don't really need to move it that far, but it won't hurt to. Keep in mind that world.begin flying, which is the thing that starts running when the mouse is clicked, calls this world.test for crash an infinite number of times. It just keeps calling it and calling it and calling it. So what's going to happen here is if I get my biplane too close to the windmill, this piece of code will execute. As soon as it's done executing, this method, world.test for crash, will be called again. And when it's called again, the propeller will be below the ground level, and then the normal crash routine, or the old crash routine, will then be called. Okay, let's see what happens when I play this with my new modifications in place. And my airplane is flying, and I'm headed towards the windmill. And I did my 2 rotations. I fell. It flashed on and off, and although you wouldn't have heard the sound because the software wouldn't pick that up that's making this video, the pilot did yell, "It burns," and there it flew into it again. That is all you have to do for the homework. You could get a lot more complicated with this. You could notice I have the plane spinning right. You could have it spin right when it's on the left side of the windmill, have it spin right when it's on the left side. You could have the plane just go down a little bit below ground level so parts of it are sticking out. You could have it falling and spinning at the same time. You could really elaborate on what this code looks like if you would want to do that, but I do need you to do at least what I've shown you so that you can understand how to make the if statement using the functions. And that is it for today's homework.